That's awesome. All right. Well, it's the top of the hour. Hi, I'm so glad you're all chatting. Again, I want to really encourage you to use the chat throughout our conversation today. I can definitely try to address things as we go if it's something that kind of goes with the flow. If not, we'll just hit it up at the end. Does that sound good to everybody? Since I can't get a thumbs up back, I'm going to just say yes. There we go. Thank you. So we're here today to talk about how project management empowers accessibility. We have a lot of wonderful ways that we can, fold it in. I'm personally a Schitt's Creek fan, and there's this wonderful sketch that shows two people who clearly have not spent a great deal of time in the kitchen reading a recipe, and they're saying, well, just fold it in. And they're like, yeah, but how do I do that? And they keep saying, well, just do it, just new it, just fold it in. And I feel like there's a great set of tools out there for development teams to learn how to fold it in, sort of speak. But for managers, it can be a little bit less defined. And I really want to give your teams the ability to really just have it be what you do. So what we're going to chat about here today is basically we are here, acknowledge where we are starting from, and then how to plan for things and watching out for those flying monkeys, because every project ever has a flying monkey somewhere. How to talk to our stakeholders. And, what if you're already in the fictional version of Kansas, since we have individuals from Kansas with us, which is awesome. And then our darling teams too. And then if we click our heels, which let's get into this. But first, who am I to talk about this? I'm actually way happier than I look in that picture. It was just one of the ones that I have that fit. My name is Donna. I have a whole bunch of alphabet soup after my name that basically says I really, really am invested in accessibility in project management. All sorts of wonderful things. I usually also start off by saying that my approach to accessibility is extremely practical, because growing up, I was the only one in my immediate family, my household, who didn't have some type of disability. We had all sorts of options covered in my household growing up. And accessibility wasn't some go team, we want to be inclusive, yay. I mean, yes, go team, we want to be inclusive. But for me at age 10, it was, hey sis, you got to hear me so you can carry stuff up the stairs when my mother goes grocery shopping because she decided to get, 40 pounds of turkey for Thanksgiving or something ridiculous. It was a matter of being practical. It was a matter of getting my needs met as a kid and even as an adult. And with that, I tend to be extraordinarily pragmatic. Where am I coming from? I have my K on too. I am from Canopy. We are an organization of some of the most beautiful people, and we get to work with some of the most amazing clients. Check us out. We have representation all over the place. Call out to Amy June for winning an award earlier today. Seriously, an amazing group. Come talk to us later if you want to know more. So we are here. I want to always start off with any conversation about accessibility or inclusivity of any kind with assuming positive intent. You're here, you're interested, you're engaged. That's awesome. That also means that likely you feel there's opportunity for improvement. And generally there always is. And that's not you or your organization. That's the fact that a lot of things are continually evolving. We live in a digital world where things are evolving faster and faster. And even in the last year, things have evolved so quickly, so much more quickly. So keeping up can be a little bit challenging. So I want to just acknowledge that. Thank you for trying. Thank you for making the time today to talk about this and to try to learn more and try to make this part of your standard operating procedures. So what happens when we have an inaccessible site? We're basically telling a quarter of the people out there to go away. For those who may not be visually intaking this conversation, there's the person from the Wizard of Oz at the Emerald City who, they knock on the door and they just tell them, go away. That's what's happening when we have an exclusive site. But I also want to acknowledge that as managers, we're usually having a lot going on. It's a whirlwind. We're balancing team needs, client needs, budgets, timings. There's always a ticket to update. There's always somebody you want to get back to. There's always somebody you want to discuss their long-term strategy with. There's all these wonderful things going on. And here we are trying to add more while there is very likely in your world a bit of a whirlwind, at least some of the time. So you have a lot going on. And what we're going to talk about is building things, building ways to be accessible into what you're already doing to make you rest a little, make it so you can rest a little easier. So 5 shots of espresso. Have to occasionally refuel throughout this presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to plan. Most of us in management roles tend to be a little bit of a planner, of wanting to know what's coming. So let's plan for things so that way we can build these into our processes that we're already doing. Because for those of us who work in more agile environments, what we really are trying to accomplish at the core of this is to include accessibility into our definition of done. Now, for those of you who may not be as familiar with, agile life, it becomes a matter of what are we defining done for a given task or initiative or sprint or what have you. It's not about necessarily this big, overwhelming, huge picture of done. So our definition of done might not always be a site. We work on a lot, at Canopy, we work on a lot of iterative improvement plans. So our definition of done for one of my clients isn't always going to be a big site launch. It's going to be improving this, making this iterative improvement. And my role needs to include accessibility in that definition of done for that particular item. But how? How do we do it? Well, first of all, we're going to ask some questions. We're going to ask key ones that help us build the accessibility into the thought process. We're going to adjust our estimates to make allowances for all the things. I mean, we're already adjusting estimates to make sure we have time for QA. We do this, we do that. We're going to estimate. And then once we have all that information, we're going to build it into our timelines and our forecasting. So it's all transparent. This isn't about sneaking this in. This is about folding it in. We want to be able to put it out there. This is this beautiful value we're offering you. So what kind of questions do you want to ask, right? Well, are the personas you're presented with inclusive? As a PM, usually one of the first things I ask is, who are your personas? Not because I want to necessarily, get into the nuances, but I want to understand who we're talking to. And you're not saying have a person who is disabled persona. The organization's target market is going to include people who identify as disabled. You're just including this in the overall picture because that's who they are. So if you don't have an inclusive representation, that's something that should be addressed. It also will help you learn that, are there specific target demographics that might benefit for some AAA consideration? Now, legally, 508 compliance, Bill C-81, a lot of the European standards all go by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, aka WCAG 2.0 AA compliance. That is the medium. AAA means it's a little bit more advanced. With the AAA considerations, and what I'm saying is a persona going to benefit from that? It's that I'm saying, are you targeting, well, for example, if you're targeting an older persona, statistically speaking, most of us are going to have experience challenges with mobility, vision, or hearing, or cognitive issues. One or more of these areas we're going to experience a challenge with as we get older. So if you're targeting a much older persona, you're going to want to maybe advocate for that, not necessarily because you're advocating for accessibility, but you're advocating for the users to be able to succeed and convert on that site. In terms of design, look to see if the brand colors are accessible. And look at things like line spacing and target sizes. I know I talk about this a little later too, but it's important to remember when you're talking to your teams and your brands that as much as a lot of the accessibility focus has been on visual challenges, there are a lot more out there. I was ecstatic earlier in the week to see the talk about making the content editor experience more inclusive for those with cognitive difficulties or atypical approaches to cognitive to that. I'm sorry, I got lost in my own train of thought there. My point is, look at the design and those design targets in line, and then with development, look at third-party integrations for accessibility and determine if there is enough QA time estimated out in the project to allow for some accessibility standard testing. Oh, thanks, Mike. For those of you who may not be reading the chat, Microsoft Inclusive Design Work highlighting permanent and temporary situational disabilities. Fantastic. There's some great links in the chat. I encourage you to take a look at those. I wanted to show you an example of a persona that includes a disability. This is a tool using CDC data. At the time of the screenshot, it was CDC data from 2017. They may or may not have updated it. I haven't checked, to be honest. But Cornell University did a statistics tool where you could put in some just very general demographics. Now, I acknowledge that in terms of gender and such, it's very binary. There's very defined demographics here that may or may not be representative or inclusive, but this is what the CDC was going by. And therefore, it's an option to use. I don't know if it's going to work with the personas you're building, but it will show you how likely an individual is percentage-wise to experience a specific type of challenge. So in this example, we have Howard here, plays wheelchair tennis. He is not a persona who is disabled. Oh, sorry, he's not a disabled persona. He is a persona who happens to be disabled. It is part of a larger picture about who Howard is and what his strength, his pain points would be on a site versus other areas. It also tells you about his income. It tells you about his marital status. It's just another piece of that puzzle. In regards to the comment I made about brand colors, this is a really cool tool, 8shapes.com. There's a million tools out there. Take a look around. There's always going to be a different tool that you're going to like best, but I like this 8shapes tool for color contrast on brand colors when you're starting a new project, because you could plug everything in and you can see what passes AA, what passes AAA, what might pass at a larger text size, things like that. So there's great tools. These are things you can use to empower your team and ask those questions early. Then estimating. I don't love estimating personally. We all do it. It's a part of the thing, but it's something we're already accounting for unknowns or trying to account for unknowns. This is just another thing to account for. We're accounting for project management time. We're accounting for QA time. We're accounting for maybe meeting time or potential pitfalls with a third-party integration. We're accounting for these unknowns. Estimating is with accessibility. Just allow time that if you have it in the budget, allow an extra hour to screen read test, at least a page or two, or to double check colors, or to have somebody on your team be that second set of eyes to look for that line spacing. I mean, things like line spacing and target size you can see in wireframes. You don't have to get far down the line. So estimate them early in the process so that you're set up for success throughout the entire project. And then again, you're building these tools anyway. You're building your forecast for your team. You're building a roadmap for your client. If you build it in early, it's not perceived as scope creep. And that's a challenge that I have seen in the past. Which tool, H-Shapes or the Cornell one? I'm sorry, I'm responding to Brian's question about a link for a tool. And at the end, I'll make sure you get that. But you're already doing the road mapping and the forecasting. What you need to do is put that in there for transparency. Again, this comes down to showing your client the value you're providing them by building and planning for an accessible experience, as opposed to saying, oh, we need an extra hour or two to do this extra testing. That setting the expectation early is going to help you 10 times full. And I want to stress that this should be a part of what you're already doing. You don't need extra milestones. You don't need to put extra highlights on it. If we think about it, we don't always put big milestones or big things when we're building a responsive experience because it's just what you do. Those of you who have heard me talking on and off the last few years, you hear me say a lot. Once accessibility is what we do, we won't talk about it as much. We don't talk about being responsive. We don't talk about a lot of these user things. It's just built into what we do. Accessibility has to be that ingrained that it's just what you do. So what to watch out for? Cue to caffeinate. Okay. Watch out for flying monkeys because I think most project management has to come with a healthy sense of paranoia in the non-clinical sense, meaning that we always need to look out for the pitfalls. We always need to look out for what's coming or what might be an area that could trip somebody up. So, common problem areas that you might want to take a look at is navigation. Will the mega menu or expanding menus be keyboard accessible? More and more of them are, but there are some that are still a little iffy. Have you designed the skip to main content link? Sometimes the designing of that to make that branded with the overall experience is overlooked. And I think that might, and this is again, just Donna's opinion, I think that comes from a misunderstanding that all screen readers users are not visual users. And there is a whole lot of people out there who use both a screen reader while they're visually taking in the site. So by having that skip to main content styled, so it's a visual experience as well as that ability to skip past all your header information, it's a UX thing. Is that going to get you tripped up on a 508 compliance? I wouldn't think so. but is it something that's going to make your site an accessible user experience and really inclusive? Yes. With forms, you have labels, arias, alerts, focuses. There's all sorts of things that can go wrong with forms. One that I've been talking about lately, just with people in passing, is that when the error message pops up, if somebody puts in a bad email address, for example, it's a newsletter sign up form, enter your email, subscribe. They enter a bad one. The keyboard focus is down on that submit button, but the error message saying that that was a bad email is visually put up here above the form field. So it doesn't let the person's going to have to use their keyboard. A non-visual user would have to use their keyboard to try to find out why their subscribe didn't work, or maybe not be able to perceive that. So there's all sorts of areas and forms, and that's something you're going to want to leave a little more time in your estimations for. Carousels are not inherently accessible. There's a lot of information out there on that. I'm sure that somebody has done a full session just on this, so I won't go into that. Headings, that making that order, the heading order, meaning H2, H3, H4, and the style, match them so it's a really a good user experience. Again, so that way somebody who's maybe using assistive technology but it has a visual experience too, so that matches. And then captions. In designs, a lot of the time it's forgotten or just overlooked that some complex images are going to need captions. So you need to be able to account for that. And you need to be able to have visually, whether it be something that expands like an accordion or maybe a different size text. There's all sorts of things you can do. Of course, there's alt tags, but biggest highlight there is to make sure people make them meaningful. This might be something that you're more advising the client on, or your the content editors, rather than your team. But it's just really important to say that there's a big difference between person in chair versus 10-year-old boy sitting alone in a room with a red balloon. One's kind of a sad story, one's completely nondescript. They're both the same picture. So something like that might be really important to communicate. And then, of course, color contrast, which we kind of touched on before. Couple of key areas that are really important to remember. Again, accessibility is not just for for users who are visually impaired. There's so many different ways people perceive the web. Don't just focus on the one. Any testing is better than no testing. I am not a native screen reader user. Anybody who's ever seen me use a screen reader can tell this without even meeting me. Me screen reader testing is better than nothing. Whenever you have the opportunity, test with native users. People who use tools every day are the people to test if what you're doing works. However, if for whatever reason that is unavailable to you, test it yourself. Go ahead. It doesn't take a huge overhead to learn some of these things. Test it. Your product will be better for it. And then advocate for native user testing for sure. And then inclusion matters. If you're managing media heavy sites, or maybe or actually any of them, but a media heavy site that uses a lot of imagery, representation matters. Not tokenism, but again, it comes down to users are people with disabilities. There's no reason they shouldn't be represented. There are no shortcuts to accessibility. Some people have recently heard me go on kind of a soapbox about this, but the short version is overlays and such are actually ableist. They have not protected people from legal action, if that's the goal. They focus primarily on visual challenges. There's a few that go into other areas, And if yourself or your client are trying to use these to be compliant, it's not a good idea. Yeah, it's don't do this. Don't do it. It's the kid who has to sweep the floor at night, who's putting it all under the rug, all the breadcrumbs under the rug, and then you wonder why you get ants. That is the equivalent of this. It's just it's a negative thing. So what we need to do as PMs here is advocate for patients. That is hard. I'm not naturally a patient person, so this is extra hard, but this is hard to advocate for patients, but you have to do it. You don't want to rush QA. We never want to rush QA, ever, but you don't want to rush the accessibility and just, we don't really have time for that. We're just going to we'll just do it later. Build it into the plan and advocate for that patience. Now, I'm going to be brutally honest. I acknowledge that there's going to be times when you are going to be testing after, when there won't be time for a patient. Somebody's did something and something went down somewhere and you're throwing up a hot fix faster than you can know about it. Everybody's stressed, throwing it up there, getting that hot fix up there. It might be something you have to test after. Test it still, but I'm going to acknowledge that it's not always going to be as practical. I acknowledge that this happens in areas outside of accessibility in our world sometimes. It's not what we want. It's not our operating procedure, but it's something that I want to acknowledge the fact that I'm started this whole thing, assume positive intent. I'm still assuming positive intent. But I'm acknowledging that this part might be hard because it's advocating with a lot of people. And sometimes it's a lot of stress behind it or perceived stress. So advocate for it, build it into the process so you don't have to advocate so much. There you go. So how to talk to stakeholders. I'm getting back to this assuming positive intent because I feel that sometimes we feel our stakeholders stress and it's, it feels like they want to cut corners or something when the fact is they don't. They have pain points too. They have needs. And in order for you to be able to successfully build accessibility into the processes and have your relationship in your projects to be a success and continue to be a success, continue to be a success, then you need to approach them with compassion and empathy. Almost stopped talking from lack of caffeine. It's terrible. It's all better now. All right. So compassion and empathy is really the key. I believe that it's the key to most stakeholder relationships or most relationships, period. But especially with this, because what they're worried about is budget, timeline, the users, and their team. There's always going to be other things too, but these are 4 key areas of pain points. So if we build this into our already existing estimates and timeline, they'll understand where it fits into their budget. They'll be able to see where it is on their timeline. If it's in their personas, they're understanding the value of what you're doing, not only to them, but their users. And then with their staff, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, you want to give them options to empower their staff to take care of some of this on their own. With CMSs, I was originally a front-end developer, or actually just a developer pre-CMSs, way back when. And back then it was, what are we going to do to make it so that nobody can break the site? Because these were these delicate things. And then as we evolved, it came about more and more about getting, okay, Well, we can have site builders, we can have content editors, we can have all of these roles and roles and permissions and all these things to empower people to manage their existing digital presence and to grow it and evolve it. And it's wonderful. Well, now we want to teach these same people and continue to empower them by teaching them how to do it in an accessible way. Because if you're practical in the way you approach accessibility, it is more meaningful. My mother had a lot of mobility issues when I was a kid, and it was not a matter of, if I were to have ever made a big deal about, oh, you need me to do X for you, it would have been robbing her of her dignity, when as a member of my household, I should have been doing X because I was the one who was capable of doing that, and she was the one who was requesting it as an aside. The woman offered more value to that household than I can say, but this was an area she needed me. So practically, you just went in and you took care of it and you moved on. And that's just what you did. Accessibility, again, should get to the point where you don't have to talk about it. It should be as natural as it is to make it so that you can buy socks on an iPhone. So, caffeination moment. What if you're already in Kansas in the figurative sense? I actually hadn't accounted for anyone really being from Kansas. I'm sorry. I don't know why that makes me giggle. Forgive me. But sometimes you get a site. Sometimes you find that something got pushed after and something needs remediation. It's inevitable. You're going to come across that. So we want to plan for the past. When it's a new client that you're bringing in your onboarding process, include some, oh, nobody expects Kansas. I'm sorry, Barbara. When you're planning for the past, when you're onboarding a new client, include a high-level accessibility assessment when you're onboarding them as part of your normal technical assessment. You want to just take a look at generally what's there. And I'm not suggesting a full audit. I'm saying use Wave, use Site Improve, use Pally if that's built into your circle processes, use a quick screen reader test, use some of the tools and do a quick high level, take a look at GA. What are the three most trafficked pages? Okay, I'm going to do a screen reader review of just these 3 pages just to get a feel. Make it part of your standard process. Then very often when you're onboarding a new client, you are also inheriting a bit of a backlog, particularly if it's not a full site build. Look for any red flags. We talked about earlier navigation. We talked about forms. We talked about third-party integrations a bit. Anything with Ajax that can be a little bit confusing to look at and to test for. It's not that they're necessarily inaccessible. It's just that it's a little bit trickier. So look for red flags and maybe ask somebody to take a closer look at those with you so that way you can plan for it. If you have the opportunity, when you ask them about those personas, see if there is representation. And then if there's no sense that accessibility has been on anyone's radar, sometimes bringing up the legal awareness can help. Unfortunately, the Winn-Dixie decision, I think that was yesterday or earlier this week, was a blow, but I don't think it's going to be, I can't believe it's going to be where the wind is shifting. I think it was a moment. Bringing up the legal awareness can only help. Clicking our heels. Let's bring this home. Let's make it, flexible and something we can work with in our systems. So talk to your client about content editor training and ways to empower their users to keep a site accessible. It's not a matter of you have to do it. If you need to find a partner, there are plenty of organizations that are wonderful out there that can help this. Maybe who you partner with now is able to do that, but help themselves, and it will add value in the long run. Work with stakeholders if there isn't an accessibility statement. An accessibility statement is just that. It's a statement of, hey, this is what we're trying for. If you are having a challenge on our site, let us know and we'll try to fix it. This is, these are the standards we're going by. This is who you contact. Give people a way to talk to you about this. So that way it's a strength. Do schedule checks. I feel that some sort of drift tends to happen on sites over time. And it's not one person does something wrong. It's just maybe you added 4 components and each one worked. But later on, the way that the content editor stacked them in the paragraphs wasn't what was anticipated. And now it reads a little weird on a screen reader. Or maybe when you zoom up to 200%, or maybe some of the elements got a little closer together and would actually create some sort of finger trap on a mobile experience. There's all these things that could just happen. Just every 6 months or whatever, do a check. It doesn't need to be this deep dive unless you see a lot of red flags, and then definitely take that deep dive. But just keep an eye on it. Keep your finger on the pulse. And then grow your team and build team leaders. I'm fortunate enough, as I said, to work with some incredible people. And I have both WordPress and Drupal developers who, some of them have really taken on leadership on helping others understand some of the pitfalls of the code that I don't. I'm not a developer anymore. I'm the first to say that. I'm usually the first 10 people to say that. Nurture your team to allow them the space and the time to grow this expertise. And it's just going to make all of your lives more enriched. So if you're able to plan this stuff in, if as managers and product owners and all of this, we just build it into what we're already doing, we don't have as much balancing and shuffling and rethinking later. It makes our lives easier in the long run too. It's not just a better product, which is frankly what we're trying for, but it also makes our lives easier, which, hey, nice bonus. And our darling teams too. I actually have a small brown dog. I almost dragged her in just to hang out with us, but I was concerned that somebody, she might bang something or tip something over or what have you. But our darling teams too, because something we have to keep in mind is right now, especially right now in the last year, we have seen more and more and more go digital. And our teams need this too. So do yourselves a favor. I don't care what system, Zooms, Teams, Meets, all of these, turn on the captions. I've got to tell you, as a mom who's been homeschooling for over a year, captions are a really good thing too. When you're talking in Slack, a lot of us use Slack to chat. Bold your Slack links. For whatever reason, links are not underlined in Slack. It's just a color change. So until a change is made bigger, Zoom does have captions natively right now. They've extended it, I forget where, but there is Zoom captioning available, Bill. Typically it's at an enterprise account level, but they've made it free for everybody for the time being during COVID, where so many people are remote. If you hang out after, or we could pop into another room somewhere, we could chat about that and I could show you if you'd like. Oh, thank you, Denise. So bold the Slack link so it's a little bit easier to see where those links are. And then leave space. This is a really helpful technique, not only for individuals who may experience cognitive differentiators, but even in my experience, more introverted individuals really take benefit if you leave space. As you can kind of tell, especially with the caffeine, but in general, I talk a lot. I mean, I talk a lot. Leave space to try to allow other people time to speak their thoughts on your team calls. Give that extra pause. And people might laugh at me, but if you see me on a team meeting sometime and you actually have my fingers over my mouth, it's to remind me to keep quiet that extra minute. It's sad, but it's true and it works. Leave space for individuals who may not be that quick talker to get their thoughts in. And questions. I'm going to go back through. I agree about Zoom should configure them by default. I'm going to just scroll through here, but please type in your fold in the cheese. Sorry, I'm catching up. Oh, thank you for so many great links, everyone. Yes. All right. Wonderful. So are there any questions or any of this? Oh, thank you. It's so great to see that you're using that Slack link tip. Are there any other questions or things just you want to chat about? We've got a few more minutes, I think. Actually, Mike, how many more minutes do we have? I should know this.
We're available till 3.
Oh, excellent. So we've got plenty of time. If there's other areas you'd like me to go back over, or if there's things that I maybe didn't cover that you've encountered as a challenge, I'd love to hear from that. And frankly, again, make this more of a conversation. All right. Well, then I think we're brewing pretty well then. Oh, there we go. You missed the first 15 minutes. I will be sharing the deck later. The first 15 minutes were a lot of kind of where we're starting from and a few of the techniques there. But yes, I will be sharing the link, and I'm sure this video will be posted as well. I don't have the link where I've uploaded it yet, but I will right after this. I believe, Michael, just back me up on this. I believe that when we upload our files, it goes right to the web page that on the DrupalCon site with our presentation, right?
Correct.
So just go ahead and go back to the DrupalCon 2021 session page for this, and that How Project Management Empowers Accessibility webpage, and I'll be uploading it to there later today. Oh, I'm happy. I'm so glad you guys got something from it. Thank you. In truth, I'm going to go through and make sure I grab all of these links too, because I think Mike added a few that I haven't looked at recently. Oh, that's so nice to hear. Thank you. I definitely wanted you all be able to come away with some actionable items. So that's wonderful. Thank you.